I received, this book was published on Tuesday, Ray Kurzweil's newest book, The Singularity is Nearer When We Merge with AI. And so I think our next two sessions are well-timed. They are AI and Medicine, Living in the New Atlantis, that'll be coming up second, and then first, Defining Humanity Down, the Irony of Generative AI and Human Anthropology in Christian Bioethics. Our speaker for this first address is Jason Thacker. He serves as an assistant professor of philosophy and ethics at Boyce College in Louisville, Kentucky. He's also a research fellow in Christian ethics and the director of the Research Institute at the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission of the Southern Baptist Convention. I hope that you saw the document that the ERLC released in May, written by their research staff, of which Mr. Thacker is a part. I was saddened that the document didn't get more exposure. It's been overshadowed by the resolution that the SBC passed, which is not problematic, but the document itself that came out in May is really terrific. It is concise, it is clear, and it's presented in a very good format, and I really do recommend it to you. In fact, Jason was just telling me that the erlc.com/IVF sort of catalogs their resources, and so I would recommend that resource to you, even though that has nothing to do with our session here today. He's the author of several books, including Following Jesus in the Digital Age, The Age of AI, Artificial Intelligence, and the Future of Humanity. This was the first of his books that I read, and I have consistently used his definition of artificial intelligence from that book in my own talks. He served as the editor for the Digital Public Square, Christian Ethics in a Technological Society, which I mentioned last night. Keith Plummer had a chapter in that book. And he is the co-editor with Ben Mitchell, a guy that a few of you will have heard of the Essentials in Christian Ethics series with B&H Academic. And this series published on June 1st, so just this month, a short companion on Christian ethics by Gil Mylander, another name that a few of you will recognize. And when I purchased that book for the library, and I want to believe, so I will continue to believe, and Brian, do not correct me, I believe that it is the 3,000th book in the CBHD Research Library. If not the 3,000th, it's right in that neighborhood. So when I was thinking about the topic, I was looking for someone who is keeping tabs on this very rapidly developing field, and who is taking a serious and considered approach to it from a Christian point of view, and that person is Jason Thacker. So please welcome him to the podium.
Well, good afternoon. It's good to be with you all this afternoon, and Matthew, thank you so much for the introduction. I was looking forward to a fun little story, but we just met each other yesterday officially. So I don't get one of those stories. But it is a real honor to be with you all this afternoon. I'm really grateful for the entire staff here at the Center for Bioethics, Human Dignity, as well as the leadership here at TEDS for putting on a conference like this. Conferences are not easy to put on. There's a lot of moving parts and a lot of people that are involved in this, especially Brian and his great work, but really the entire team to be able to do something like this. I'm also thankful for our sound team because they gave me a mic that I can walk around a little bit with. Which I pace and move around. I'm not just kind of stuck to a podium, but it is good to be with you all this afternoon. As we look at the conversations, and let's be honest, a lot of the hype surrounding artificial intelligence, what it is, where we're heading, what's coming in the next few years, there's a lot of hype, but I think there's a common thread that kind of permeates so much of the conversation and kind of current discourse about where we are as a society and where we're heading. No matter what side of the debate you fall on with artificial intelligence, it seems that everyone realizes that everything seems to be changing at a lightning pace and that we're not ready for it. We seem to have an ethic that often has to catch up for what's going on. We have these issues, even within the church at times, it feels like we're kind of running behind. This is one of the reasons back in 2019, the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission released the first ever faith-based statement of ethics on artificial intelligence, and then followed that up with a resolution in 2022, kind of getting ahead even of many of our Roman Catholic friends who had been working on this for a number of years to have an official denominational statement. Because often the church has played catch up to a lot of emerging technologies. And I think this is an opportune time for us to step into the conversation, to be part of the conversation as it's happening, so that we can also help to shape where we're heading and how we think about these things, specifically with Christian wisdom. Specifically, a lot of what we're doing here focused on the nature of what does it mean to be human. which I think, and I know being at a conference like this, you would assume that is one of the most important questions I think we can ask today. What does it mean to be human? How do we define that? And we'll talk a little bit about that today. It seems like every day we're hearing something new about these tools, how another company, yet another company, is becoming an AI company. It seems like that is the cool thing to do. Everyone wants to do that. We see how AI is already shaping our society for both good and for ill. From wall-to-wall media coverage, pull up any, you don't have to do it right now. We did hear Dr. Palmer last night about, sticking with it and not having our phones out. But it is interesting, if you go to any major news source, you're gonna see on the homepage probably one or two or a plethora of stories about artificial intelligence. From business to medicine to government to warfare, you will see something about AI. We're in the midst of a deep AI hype cycle. We also see bold predictions of where we're heading even in the next few years. A few years ago, I don't remember the author who said it, but there was a writer talking about a lot of our conversations surrounding specifically things like artificial general intelligence or conscience AI or something like a human-like intelligence. And he pointed out a little bit of the kind of the funny irony in it. He said, essentially, it's interesting that a lot of these bold predictions of where we're heading, when we're going to reach that point of, quote, singularity, where everything changes and we can't go back, is always between 20 to 80, maybe 100 years away. And he said it's kind of quite convenient and quite funny because by the time that you are wrong, no one will care or remember who you are. So it's quite convenient to be able to make these bold predictions. Now, no matter where we are, when we're talking about the here and now, many are wondering though, what should we use these tools? How do we use these tools? How should we develop them with safety and particular guards? How do we think about the way that this is going to revolutionize, let's be honest, education, how it's revolutionizing the workforce, how it's revolutionizing foreign policy, warfare, business, industry, government, and even the church itself. You may have seen news not too recently that a Catholic AI priest was defrocked because of the controversy surrounding artificial intelligence. AI is everywhere, and its use is growing at an exponential rate. But there seems to be little consensus, not only of what it is, where we're heading, but also what we are to do about it. I think when many of us talk about or even think about AI today, many of us kind of have one of two reactions. Some of us have a lot of excitement. We kind of have a more utopian vision. We're excited about where we're heading. We're looking at all the benefits of these tools and how these tools can revolutionize so much of our lives. Others of us are quite fearful. We kind of have that rejection kind of mindset. We have that kind of uncritical rejection versus that Dr. Palmer talked about last night versus an uncritical embrace. We reject these tools. We're fearful of the future. Everything seems to be changing and we're not ready. So on one hand, that kind of makes sense. Things are changing quite rapidly, actually. We have some very important questions, and we're not talking about human level or God-like intelligence. We're talking about the narrow AI tools that we use every single day. Should we use these things versus just can we? But then when you start to think about all the benefits, the promise, the excitement, the kind of excitement surrounding these tools about how they're revolutionizing our society and our personal life, we see a lot of the brokenness in our world, and some start to believe that these type of tools may usher in an age of human flourishing, the likes of which we've never actually experienced. This position is often kind of categorized in the old Silicon Valley mantra of move fast and break things, or is this really a problem? There's a lot of good. Let's just pursue innovation for innovation's sake. Yeah, there's some little bad areas every once in a while. We can address those, but let's just keep pushing. Let's keep pushing. Let's keep pushing. Because the question isn't should we do it, but can we? We must pursue innovation for innovation's sake. In an age centered around efficiency and convenience that's exacerbated by our technologies, we rarely as the church, but let's be honest, we rarely as human beings just take time to slow down and to ask some of the hard questions, to think holistically about how these tools are revolutionizing and shaping every single aspect of our life. This is one of the reasons that I was so thankful to have Dr. Keith Plummer opening up our conference last night, speaking about virtue and the way that technology shapes us, that it's never neutral, that it's doing something to us. Wisdom within a Christian framework, within a Christian worldview, calls us to think deeply about these tools and how they're shaping and forming us, and specifically our pursuit of loving God and loving our neighbor as ourselves. We must ask ourselves, is technology a merely neutral, valueless tool that we simply use for efficiency or convenience sake? Or might it represent something deeper, something bigger than that, that is shaping every single aspect of our life for both good and for ill? Is it possible that instead of just using these tools, that they may actually be using us, shaping us, forming us? Could it be of these tools, AI tools, but specifically technologies more broadly, they could be shaping our perception of the world, shaping how we understand God, how we understand ourselves as human beings, which I think is a very important question in the age of AI, but also the world around us, specifically, what does it mean to be human? How do these tools shape our perception of humanity? In a world that pushes us to go faster, better, stronger, to be more efficient in everything, it is good and wise for us to take time to slow down and to ask some of these hard questions, to question the nature of technology, what it's doing to us. To kind of build off of what Dr. Palmer talked about last night, you've heard the old adage, when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? I have vivid memories of this, and it's very true, because my sons, I have Hollis, who's 7 years old, Porter, who is 6 years old. When they were much younger, we had this little wooden toolbox, and it had this little yellow hammer in it, a little wooden hammer. Now, when you put that little hammer into a toddler's hand, what did that little boy do? He hit things, right? It's what a hammer is designed to do. That's how we know this is a good hammer versus a bad hammer. Is it fulfilling its purpose? Well, in that little boy's hand, everything became a nail. The nails themselves, the screws, he didn't understand the difference, so he'd bang the screws through the box as well. Also, he would hit his brother in the head, me in the foot, his other toys, the wall. There were all sorts of things, because when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. If I came up and put out in the middle of this room a big box of hammers and started passing them out to you all, within about 14 milliseconds, at least all the dudes, and let's be honest, many of the ladies as well, would be hitting someone or something, tapping the table. Why? Because that's what hammers are designed to do. Media theorist Neil Postman picks up on this truism, and he extends it. He says, to a person with a pencil, everything looks like a sentence. To a person with a TV camera, everything looks like an image. To a person with a computer, everything looks like data. I have a good friend who teaches at Union University, Jacob Schatzer. He updates this adage and says, when you have a smartphone with a camera, everything looks like a status update. I think we can extend that one step further. That when people in an age of AI have access to these tools, humanity may start to become more like a mere machine. We start to compare ourselves to these machines and define what it means to be human in relation to the objects around us. This is not a new thing. Actually, the church has long done this. We compare ourselves to creation. We compare ourselves to the rest of the animal kingdom. We compare ourselves to other things rather than our Creator. This is one of the larger themes, this kind of idea of seeing humanity as a mere machine. This is one of the larger themes in a work that was referenced earlier, Jeffrey Bishop's The Anticipatory Corpse, where he says that technology changes how we see other human beings, especially how we practice medicine. We have this mechanization, this kind of medicalization of the human person. We see this instrumentalizing of humanity, to see that humanity is a problem to be solved, rather than an ensouled human being created in the very image of God. This truth hit me a few years ago. Some of you who may know our story, some of you don't. Back in 2019, my wife was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma at the young age of 33. She began a series of chemo treatments, including, this is all during COVID, so it was an extra difficult time for us. She was going through a number of treatments, chemo treatments. She ended up having a stem cell transplant. It was quite a difficult time and a dark season for our family. Thank God for the countless doctors and clinicians and nurses who cared so well for her. And just to be able to tell you now, she is 3 years in remission. She had a clear scan back in March. She's officially 3 years post. They say that she's in the single digits of it reoccurring. At 5 years, they may consider her cured of Hodgkin's lymphoma. But through that dark season, I remember having countless conversations with her. We had so many doctors who cared for us so well, not just treating the problems, but also caring for her as not just a body, but also a soul, a young woman who was hurting and overwhelmed with pain and tears. But we had some doctors, and I still thank God for them, because they cared for her so well, and I think we're part of the way that Lord healed her. But they would see her, they kind of lacked what we call bedside manner. Many of us doctors, or many of us involved in the medical industry, know that those who can't really carry a conversation, who can't really engage with the whole person in front of them. They seem to lack some of the actual human elements of the practice of medicine. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm grateful for them, but they started to treat her, and she noticed this. She was the one who told me they started to treat her as a problem to be solved, or rather than a whole person. What's interesting is, while we cannot and should not lay the blame of this kind of technological kind of aspect, this kind of mechanization of humanity, we can't lay it solely at the feet of technology because things are much more complex than that. Technology, nevertheless, has played a role in shaping our perception of the world, as others like Postman and others have noted. Postman goes on to argue that those truisms, when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. It calls our attention to see that every technology has a prejudice. Every technology has a purpose. Every technology has a design. It has both intended consequences as well as unintended consequences. Good friend at Derek Sherman, who teaches at Calvin University in Grand Rapids, notes that technology is value-laden, meaning it's never truly neutral. We, though, are so blinded by the formative powers of technology that we fail to clearly see the prejudices and the values at work in these tools, as opposed to a simple tool-based understanding of technology. These tools are shaping every single aspect of our life toward the values of our culture, towards convenience and efficiency and speed at any cost, underscoring the word any cost. Technology then doesn't exist as a simple neutral, isolated tool, but tools that represent the values of our larger culture, specifically a truncated and a bastardized view of what does it mean to be human. That we are the mere sum of our parts. This kind of push towards efficiency often leads to a faulty or an incomplete view of the human person, towards this instrumentalizing of humanity. I think it's then helpful for Christians to start to realize that technology is not neutral, that it's forming and shaping us, one that's deeply altering and shaping every single aspect of our life, namely, who is God and what is he like, our view of God, our view of the human person as well as the world around us. One of the ways that we can see that AI specifically is shaping us is often through the language that we use to describe these tools and the vision of where we're heading as a society. Artificial intelligence, simply put, is non-biological intelligence, the ability of a machine to perform a human-like task. It represents a broad field, part of the field of computer science. It encompasses disciplines like machine learning, deep learning, natural language processing, robotics, machine vision, speech recognition, and so much more. AI, though, has seen a surge of interest and hype in the last few years. These things aren't all that new. Back in 1957, John McCarthy coined the term artificial intelligence at a summer gathering of academics at Dartmouth. And even then, we started to have some rudimentary kind of early forms of artificial intelligence. So what happened? What's happening? What's going on? AI in recent years has become a major topic of discussion across industries about how it can automate, streamline, augment so very many aspects of our life, including this kind of increasingly being explored in the use of medical applications in the care of our patients. Why? Because it makes things faster, it makes things quicker, it makes things cheaper. When we talk about artificial intelligence, I think it's helpful for us because often, and I respect Dr. Kurzweil and so many others who have written on these topics, but sometimes we blur the lines about what we're actually talking about. We talked about AI, but there are actually different types of AI. You don't hear this a lot, but there are different types of AI. There is something called narrow AI, something called general artificial intelligence or broad AI, and something known as artificial superintelligence or SI. Specific use, when we talk about narrow AI, this is the only form of artificial intelligence that we've ever been able to create or you've ever seen, unless you were watching a Hollywood thriller or sci-fi movie plot. That's when things get a little weird. A narrow form of AI, you're using it every single day whether you realize it or not. From your banking apps, your communication platforms, from the stock market to our government, to your social media platforms, to your email, to your Netflix queue, your Amazon, everything we use that has an algorithm, has a smart tool or smartphone or smart device is using some form of narrow AI. There's also another form, what we talk about broad AI, or this kind of human-like intelligence. You start to see the language creep about what we're talking about and describing. Now, whether you think that this is actually possible, I don't, from a philosophical perspective, think that AGI, or artificial general intelligence, I think these machines will clearly mimic, clearly imitate, but I don't think they'll actually take on a human-like intelligence. Even Elon Musk in recent years has joined the fray of kind of promoting AGI and saying in the next year or two at most, that's his prediction, kind of a bold prediction, not 80 years from now, not 20 years from now, next year or the next year, he thinks that we will reach artificial general intelligence, meaning we have an AI that is smarter than human beings, or often what's deemed as generally intelligent. We have other companies like OpenAI and so many others pursuing public plans and goals with AGI systems. Why? Because we'll finally have something like us. One author years ago wrote a book called In Our Own Image. I really love that. I kind of wish I got that book title. In Our Own Image. He basically states that God in the creation, the Genesis narrative, created us in his image, and guess what we get to do? We create things in our image. This idea that we can create something like us. Lastly, you have this idea of a God-like intelligence, ASI, or super intelligence, and the writing's already on the wall with that. We can create something that is bigger and better than us. You remember G.K. Beale and We Become What We Worship? This idea that we look at the object, Isaiah 40, and the craftsman takes some of the wood and he crafts out an idol, he bows down and worships, oh my God, save me, and bowing down and worshiping, and then the other half of the wood, he makes a fire and cooks some food for himself. And the scriptures are very clear, the prophets are very clear about this theme of idolatry that we see in this language. I think this is very clear and very prominent, especially in conversations surrounding artificial intelligence, that we become what we worship. One of the things I love about the way that Beale writes about that is that we become what we worship. This idea that we define ourselves, we base who we are, our own identity, on the things that we create or the things in front of us. Many in the debate over AI and what's possible are rooted in various philosophies that are completely at odds with a Christian vision of reality, a Christian vision of truth, and a Christian vision of the good life. The language that we use in these debates, even talking about the different types of AI, I think begin to blur the line, or not completely get rid of the line, between humanity and the things we make. Years ago, I wrote an op-ed for a magazine on the ethics of AI in warfare. This is well before kind of the generative AI hype cycle. And I distinctly remember some feedback that I received from a theology professor at a major evangelical seminary. And I really appreciated the feedback. And what he basically said was that to even use the language of artificial intelligence is a misnomer. That's not adequately labeled. These machines are not truly intelligent. And I said, well, yes, because it's artificially intelligent. But he didn't like the language of intelligent about AI because he says this was kind of a misnomer. This was a misnaming and understanding. And in some ways, he was right. The language we used often kind of anthropomorphizes our machines and our creations, even though I think his definition and kind of his application seem to oversimplify a lot of the challenges, specifically the ethical challenges we face with AI. I do find it interesting, though, that use of language, specifically that anthropomorphic language. When we talk about these technologies, we routinely give our AI assistants or talk to our AI assistants as if it's a her or a him. Particularly, I find it interesting that often it's a young woman, and we often say she or her when we're talking about these AI assistants. I think there's more that needs to be explored there. We give names to these tools like Siri, Alexa. I don't want to say too loud because someone's device will start to go off. Remember, AI is everywhere, folks. We see this especially in the idea of a lot of the questions about, quote, replacing or augmenting or automating certain aspects of our society, that these machines can perform human-like tasks, that they come alongside us. Even given the language capacities of AI, some have begun to wonder when these machines will, quote, wake up, when they will gain consciousness or awareness. And then questions, even some within the Christian community start to posit, what about these, if these machines start to use kind of language in the way that we use language and kind of can fool us in that kind of Turing style type of test, should we consider them moral persons? Because they can, quote, think, they can, quote, create. You see that language creep that's going, that anthropomorphic language that we use? What is happening here? Roman Catholic philosopher Robert Spaman, German Catholic philosopher, says this. He says, even today, computers are in many respects ahead of the intellectual feats of the human person, meaning they're smarter than us, folks. Yet it is pointless to say that the computer, quote, does not think. It means that it does not know it's thinking. It means that it doesn't experience thinking. He goes on to write that there is no ghost in the machine. Why do we do this? Why do we use this type of language? Some argue in the broader philosophical circles that we use this to become more comfortable with these machines, that we can kind of let our guard down, especially with robots, especially with young children, giving them names, giving them faces, making them look more like human beings. That this makes us more comfortable around these tools and more apt to use them. Some argue that we do this to avoid human contact, that we feel like we're connecting but never really connecting, that we're having, quote, relationships with these technologies, that we have our assistant, our friend in that sense, but not really ever actually having friends in that way. We see this in extreme examples, and when I say extreme, I mean extreme, in the dehumanization specifically with AI-empowered sex robots. So you think that that's a weird, kind of crazy idea. It is. But it's actually quite common, and this is a growing industry, to take from a sex doll to empower it with some sort of artificial intelligence. Particularly men, when then they get tired of these things, can just, quote, change a setting and change the woman. They can put on a new face and have a new personality. You can customize and personalize these things to your liking. While we've always had forms of technology, today's advancements seem quite daunting given the complexity and the power that these technologies have. They're performing a wide array of tasks that were once reserved solely for humans and now are posing what seem to be novel ethical questions for us to consider. But at its core, I don't think that technology is actually causing us to ask new questions as humanity per se, but to ask these perennial, age-old, fundamental questions in light of new opportunities. Meaning we're asking questions like, what does it mean to be human? Or what is justice? What is good? What is real? What is true? In light of the expanded moral horizons that have been wrought through the powers of technology. We're not really engaging a new set of issues per se, but we're navigating these age-old questions in light of these new opportunities. And technology and AI isn't one set of issues over here. It actually undergirds so many other questions, from religious freedom to human dignity to gender and sexuality to public policy to international affairs to human rights, to so many questions. Have a technological component. We live in, as Jacques Ellul said, a technological society. It's natural. It's like the air we breathe. It's normal. It's natural. We never question it. So if these questions that we're asking aren't all that new, why does everyone seem to be in a panic over artificial intelligence, and why now? It seems that generative AI is doing something different. It's not just automating, it's not just streamlining, but it seems to be taking on human characteristics, maybe some of the faulty interpretations of what we assumed it meant to be human, this, quote, rational capacity, creative capacities, all of these different capacities that we assumed were solely for humanity. We're starting to see them play out in these artificially intelligent machines. One of the most ironic things in the name of this talk, this kind of defining humanity down, the irony of generative AI. One of the most ironic things I think about the age of AI is that we tend to humanize our machines, anthropomorphize, to humanize our machines. In the same respect, what are we doing? We're actually dehumanizing ourselves. We're asking these questions about what these tools might become. We seek to humanize these machines with our language and our attitudes and the ways we think we're going to develop and where we're heading as a society. At the same time, we're actually dehumanizing ourselves, seeing ourselves as merely the sum of our parts, often in a very materialistic framework, devoid of any semblance of human uniqueness and exceptionalism. I think this is one of the main reasons that we find ourselves both amazed and fearful about these tools, because they seem to be fundamentally challenging what we've long held the question, the answer of what it meant to be human. The introduction of these advanced AI systems is fundamentally challenging so much of what we've long assumed about the uniqueness of humanity for generations.
because we've assumed what it meant to be human was the ability to, quote, think, to create, to use language, to make weighty decisions, to perform certain complex tasks. And now we see these machines doing similar things. Now, I would argue they're mimicking and they're imitating because there are human beings behind them, not only creating but feeding data and kind of keeping them in line in many ways. These tools are indeed imitating and mimicking these behaviors, but these were behaviors that we long assumed that's what it meant to be human. I think that is bringing out some of the panic. Why are we so upset? Why are we so fearful of the future? For Christians, when we ask that question, what does it mean to be human? We naturally and rightly run to the text of the Scripture, and the Scripture tells us very clearly, Genesis 1:26-28, let us make man in our image, in our likeness, male and female. He created the imago Dei, the image of God. This is a good and right place for us to go. But what's interesting sometimes in Christian community is we use this language, but we say we never really define what we're saying. What is the image of God? And this is actually kind of a perennial debate. Not just within theology, not just within ethics, but specifically in the task of bioethics. What does it mean to be human? A biblical anthropology is absolutely central to the Christian life, especially Christian ethics. I think it's one of the vital keys for us to understand and to unpack, to navigate both the opportunities as well as the challenges before us in this age of AI. But we must understand what that means. Kind of peel back the layers a little bit to see some of those assumptions. This is no news to anybody in this room because many of you I've long looked up to and respected, but I want us to think about these traditional ways of understanding the image of God and what they might reveal to us about some of these assumptions that are being challenged in light of these new opportunities. Clearly, one of the most historic, kind of older views of the image of God is what's known as a substantive view of the image of God, a capacity for reason, rationality, for creativity. This is one of the most common ways that we've understood for good reason. Humanity does have a specific capacity or attribute, this ability for reason, rationality, creativity, the use of language. This is the dominant view throughout so much of church history and is widely held, kind of interestingly enough, largely in philosophical anthropologies as well, this ability to reason, to have autonomy. There's something unique and set apart about us. But as theologian Ryan S. Peterson notes about the image of God, he said, we shouldn't interpret the image of God by comparing humanity to other creatures, identifying the differences and then positing the differences as the definition of the image. We're defining humanity down. We're defining what it means to be human by looking around here rather than what the text clearly calls us to look up, to define ourselves in our relationship with God, that God is our creator, we are his creature. Now, challenges to this long-held belief, they abound, but I think most consequentially, when we start to define the nature of the image of God, the nature of, quote, human dignity, when we lay that at the feet of this idea of reason, we start to have questions about what about those who don't seem to have this capacity or who might have lower capacities to reason. Think about our preborn neighbors. They don't exhibit certain kind of rational tendencies. They don't seem to be thinking. Even young children don't. And some of the most kind of honest of bioethicists, even though I think it's an abhorrent view, I appreciate Peter Singer in the way that he talks about this when he says, look, if we're going to say that what it means to be human is this high level of reason, rational capacity, this use of language, infants don't make the cut, folks. Now, it's an abhorrent view that's kind of open to infanticide, but nevertheless, it's an honest understanding. Because what happens to those within the human community that we'd say that is a human being when they don't exhibit that capacity, when they don't have that attribute of reason and rationality? To counter these claims, I always want to be honest. It's not that whenever I present something, I always like to present the counterfactuals, how people would engage that. Many throughout philosophical history have talked about the idea of the privileging of the normal. Or as John Rawls writes in his theory of justice, famously articulated this idea of a range property. There's a particular range that people can fall in. They may be higher on that range or lower on that range. Nevertheless, this range defines what it means to be human. Okay, good. Let's speed up a little bit. We have also a relational view of the image of God. Similarly, it's a capacity or an attribute-based view. It's this ability, this capacity for social interaction and relationships, ultimately with the Lord, that we have a special relationship. And all of these things are true, folks. but also a relationship with other people, that we were created relationally in the image. This is the ability to form and to maintain relationships with God and also our fellow image bearers. I think it similarly falls prey to the same critique that we just articulated. What about those who don't seem to have that same level of capacity? Some have higher and lower. And look, I'm not talking about extroverts and introverts. I'm talking about my cousin who has significant mental disability, who is unable to perform and have kind of regular relationships with people. Is he less in the image of God? As our own John Kilner has written, does this make him little in the image of God? By no means. You wouldn't say that? I wouldn't say that. Why? It's almost as if we're appealing to something else. Another view that's become very popular as of recently in the last few generations, this kind of idea of a functional or a vice regency view. This is the view that I long held. I've changed my beliefs. You can do that, folks, and it's okay to change your beliefs over time. But this capacity to perform certain functions or jobs to represent God as his image bearers in the world, this functional, representational, royal interpretation of the image, says that we were created according to God's image, and thus that means that we have certain functions as his representatives or his vice regents on this earth. Doing what? Exercising dominion and stewardship. This view tends to rightly argue that we have moral responsibility and moral agents as image bearers, as human beings. As Carl Henry, I can't not speak of Carl Henry coming to a campus like this, as Carl Henry rightfully recognizes, this emphasis on taking dominion as the representative made in God's image is clearly, he says, an aspect of the Genesis teaching. While it is the main thrust, I believe, of Genesis 1, Ryan Peterson notes that this view tends to equate human identity and function that are not, quote, necessarily identical, even if they are mutually dependent. Why? Because not all human beings have high levels of intellect. Not all human beings have high emotional capacity or the ability to function in particular ways that we see manifested and associated with this idea of being human. This can be due to a number of factors, whether it's cognitive or physical disabilities, old age, even stage of development. In the case of specifically of our preborn neighbors and the most vulnerable in our society, including children, how we define the image of God has significant bearing on all of life. I also think it has a significant bearing on what do we do in light of these artificially intelligent machines? How do we navigate it when these machines begin to mimic or to imitate certain things, certain capacities or attributes that we've long associated with being human? In short, it's too easy for us today, too convenient for us to equate value and dignity in that of our neighbor simply based on what we do or what we can contribute to society. The Christian ethic reminds us, especially in the age of emerging technologies, that the value and dignity of a human being isn't rooted in what we do, but who we are as image bearers of our Almighty God. God made us in his very image, and nothing, not even the most advanced AI system, will be able to change that unique status. See these difference between an attribute or a capacity view versus this idea of kind of an ontological status, along with these other three views that I believe are clearly implications of the image, which I actually think the image being manifested, being seen, that we can recognize those things, that makes us human beings. That's not the actual core, the substance of what the image actually is. This image is an ontological status that is defined by being biologically human. We are a human being in terms of our genetic makeup and the way that we came into this world. Thus, we are a human being with dignity and value, respect that flows from that ontological status. This status is unalterable. It's unchangeable. And it's something that's bestowed on us uniquely by our Creator. Helmut Tilicka once said, he said that we as human beings are not loved by God because we're so valuable. We're so valuable because we're loved by God. It's not based on what we do, it's based on who we are. Theologian Richard Lentz rightfully points out that he says that the image of God, the imago Dei, doesn't appear as a place marker for an otherwise long list of human traits and qualities, meaning that while the image of God has several implications and manifestations in the lives of humanity, isn't reducible down to our traits, our attributes, or our qualities alone. One of my favorite authors, Robert Spaman, every time I go to his text, I always learn something new and kind of am challenged in that. He says this, he said, human beings have certain definite properties that license us to call them persons. But it's not the properties that we call persons, but the human being who possesses those properties. He goes on to later and say that there are, in fact, no potential persons. Persons possess certain capacities, potentialities, so personhood may develop, but nothing develops into a person. The image of God then is outwardly manifested in these three traditional ways, but I think the best way to appeal to it and instead of bringing in the privilege of the normal and this kind of idea of arranged property, to actually say by nature, by being biologically human, you are thus, that's what makes you the image of God. You are the image of God because you are biologically human. Your humanity isn't reduced down, defined down to your attributes or your capacities. A person in Robert Spaman's framework is someone versus something. I really love that. It's a subtitle of the book. He says, thus, regardless of one's capacities or attributes, we are persons simply by being members of the human species. He says very pointedly, there can and must be only one criteria for personality and only one. That is biological membership in the human race. Human beings are a specific kind of creature who do exhibit certain characteristics and attributes, but our dignity isn't based on the mere presence of those attributes. Some may be dissatisfied with this. They say there's more to say. You have to say more than that, not less. And I'm always reminded of the C.S. Lewis quote from The Abolition of Man, where he says this. He says, you cannot go on seeing through things forever. The whole point of seeing through something is to see something through it. I think that the question of ethical development and the usefulness of artificial intelligence must be centralized, specifically from a Christian approach, on this notion of human dignity as a status that is bestowed on us by God, that is worked out as we seek to love the Lord our God with all of our heart, mind, soul, and strength, Matthew 22, verses 37 through 39, and to also love our neighbor as ourself. Until we see these emerging technologies through the lens of human dignity, I think that we will fail to see the way that these technologies are shaping us. They're forming us, our perception of the world, our perception of God, our perception of ourselves as human beings, as well as the world around us. What we need, not just in society, but specifically in the church, when we're addressing these type of questions, when we're addressing these type of concerns with specifically around these emerging technologies, we need more than Band-Aid solutions and gut-level reactions. We don't need a whole bunch of AI experts that picked up the textbook yesterday. We need people who have long thought and dug deep in the wells of Christian ethics and philosophy and theology to understand what's going on and to peel back some of those layers so that we can proclaim a vision that center on the approach of human dignity, the rush of this idea of human wisdom, not human wisdom, that is, Christian wisdom that's rooted in the very word of God. When we start to understand the difference between someone and something, I think that starts to open up the characteristics to realize that while these machines are advanced, they may be smarter, and some of them are already smarter than us in very narrow ways. No matter the advances before us, that we have a steadfast hope and we have a robust ethic to navigate these from a Christian perspective. We don't engage in a place of fear. Why? Our Jesus is alive. He's sitting at the right hand of the Father. The end of the story is written, folks. That is what our hope is. We have an eschatological hope so that we don't have to fear the future, but we also don't have to be naively optimistic. We can be realistic, understanding the challenges before us, to ask that ever-prevalent question, not just can we do something, but should we? I'm going to end on a note from Neil Postman when he talks about the ways that technology shapes everything about our lives, and especially the environment that they're used in. Postman starts to talk about in his work Technopoly the way that technology shapes and forms a culture. He says that technology, media in particular, isn't an additive technology. It isn't an additive thing, meaning that you don't have old Europe plus a printing press. What do you have? A new Europe. He uses an illustration I think is quite brilliant. It works with my students, so you can steal this and use it. It's Neil Postman's. You take a bowl of water, you take a bowl of clear water, and you take one drop of red food coloring. When you drop that one drop of food coloring into it, what do you have? You don't have a bowl of clear water plus one drop of dye. What do you have? You have pink water. When we start to understand that technology is shaping and forming us, this is an additive, that it's shaping and forming every single aspect of our life, including how we view God, how we view ourselves as human beings, as well as the world around us, will realize that we live in a world of pink water. Everything is changing, but we have that robust hope, that robust ethic to navigate these challenges, to understand that God has revealed to us the way of the Christian life, summarized in his own words, to love the Lord our God with all of our heart, with all of our mind, with all of our soul, and to love our neighbors ourselves. This is the first and greatest commandment. That great commandment then flows into the Great Commission to go, therefore, and make disciples, teaching them all that we have been taught. That we proclaim boldly to a culture, what does it actually mean to be human? It's not based on what you do, it's based on who you are as we navigate the challenges before us, and we do so with a steadfast hope and peace in the midst of an uncertain future. Thank you.